Snowfall blurred the world into a hush of white, each flake a silent witness to her disgrace. The wind cut sharp across the valley, tugging at the hem of her thin dress as if to pull her backward, back toward the town that had spit her out. Josephine Walker, 26 years old, wearing boots with torn soles and bruises in places no one could see, held a broken broom over her shoulder like a soldier's last weapon. She walked hunched, lips split, stomach hollow. But her spine did not bow. The woods deepened, draped in silence. She counted her breaths and the sting in her feet to keep from crying again. Hunger she could handle. Loneliness too. But the shame, the whispers, the turned backs, the way children looked at her as if filth had grown legs, that stuck like cold under her fingernails. Smoke curled through the trees. A cabin. Not far. No curtains in the windows. A dark figure moved inside. She hesitated. Then, with what dignity she had left, she limped to the door and knocked. Once, twice. Her knuckles left smears of frost. For a long moment, there was nothing but wind. Then the door creaked open. He stood there shirtless, the heat behind him casting his skin in gold and shadow. The man was enormous, Apache, bare-chested despite the storm, with long black hair brushing his shoulders, a hunting knife sheathed at his waist. His eyes were the stillness of a frozen lake, unreadable. He looked at her. And he froze. Not from confusion. Not fear. But something else, like memory. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Can I clean your cabin, for a plate of food?" She braced herself for laughter. Or worse. But none came. He stepped aside. The warmth struck her like a slap. Wood smoke, pine, and stew she could smell but hadn't dared dream of. She stepped inside slowly, shoulders trembling. The cabin was simple. Clean. A fire roared in the hearth. A cot in the corner. Shelves with neatly folded shirts. Axes lined the wall, blades polished. Not a single crumb on the floor. She stared at the floorboards. "Where's the broom?" He handed it to her without a word. And so she cleaned, though the space was near spotless. On hands and knees, she scrubbed the same spot twice, then a third time. Her hands bled at the knuckles. Still she scrubbed. He didn't ask her to stop. Nor did he help. He just watched, as if seeing something unfold that he'd waited years to witness. Later, she heard the clink of a bowl set behind her. She turned. Steam rose from stew thicker than any she'd smelled in weeks. Her eyes welled. But she swallowed the lump in her throat and whispered, "Thank you," like she'd never said the words before. She ate in silence. He sat nearby, whittling. Not watching her, but not ignoring her either. "You live alone?" she asked. He nodded once. "You don't talk much." "No need to," he replied. His voice surprised her. Deeper than she expected. Measured. "My name's Josie," she said soft. He nodded again. "Dakota." That was all. After she finished, she tried to hand the bowl back. He waved her off. She stood awkwardly, unsure what to do with her body, her shame, her breath. Every moment felt like glass. "I'll sleep by the door," she offered. "There's space by the fire. I don't want to be in the way." He didn't move. Just looked at her. And in that stillness, she saw something flicker behind his dark eyes. Grief, perhaps. Or recognition. He took a buffalo hide from the cot and laid it beside the fire. "You're not in the way." She lay down in her clothes, arms tucked to her chest. The warmth ached. Her feet throbbed. She hadn't slept indoors in days. The fire cracked. Outside, the wind howled like a widow. When she woke, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and cedar. Dakota was already outside chopping firewood, bare arms gleaming with snowflakes. She rose quietly, folded the buffalo hide and swept again. Not because it was needed, but because she didn't know how else to repay warmth. When he returned, he brought fresh water and bread. She tried not to eat too quickly. He sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her with the same unreadable calm. "You ran from something," he said finally. She swallowed hard. "A town that wanted me to marry a man who bruised me worse than winter." He didn't flinch. Didn't ask more. "They said I dishonored my father's name." But he's dead. And I'm not a piece of cattle to be traded. Dakota nodded. They say much when a woman chooses dignity. Her breath hitched. She hadn't expected to feel seen. A knock came at the door the next day. An old ranch hand from town, delivering firewood Dakota had traded for months ago. But his eyes flicked to Josie. His smirk told stories she hadn't spoken. By the time he rode back into town, the whispers had begun. By sundown, she could feel it in the wind, those invisible threads of shame, sewn tighter now. Dakota sharpened his axe at the table. "They'll say I'm your whore," she said, not looking up. "They'll say what they want. But I'm not. I know." She folded the laundry she'd washed earlier, her fingers raw. "Why did you let me in?" He paused, the sharpening stone still in hand. "Because you were dying. Most would have let me. I'm not most." And that was the end of it. Each day followed like that. Quiet gestures. Stew. Wood carried in. Broom passed between them like an offering. No words about the town. No questions about what came before. She noticed then small things. How he never raised his voice. How he handled each knife as if it still held the weight of survival. How he lit candles when the sun dipped low, not just for light, but warmth. And how sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he stared at the fire with eyes that weren't here anymore. One evening, she touched a carved wooden horse on the shelf. "Did you make this?" He nodded. "For my daughter." She turned, startled. "You have?" "Had." He said no more. But in his silence, she saw it. A past heavy as snow on roof beams. A wound he didn't bleed anymore but lived beside. She set the horse down gently. That night, she asked, "What was her name?" "Wakasa." "It's beautiful." He didn't reply. Later, after she'd laid down and the fire had dimmed, she heard him say from the dark, "She died in her mother's arms. And I was out hunting. I didn't get to say goodbye." The silence afterward felt sacred. Like a grave undisturbed. Josie turned toward the firelight. "You don't have to talk about it." "I do," he whispered. "But not yet." She understood that. Some hurts took time. Others, a witness. The next morning, she rose before him. Cleaned the hearth. Folded his shirts. Made broth from dried herbs. And as she opened the door to bring in kindling, a strange hush clung to the air. Snow had fallen again overnight. Heavy. Still. But what stilled her breath was this, just beyond the tree line, barely visible. Animal tracks. Circling the cabin. Wolf. Or something larger. She shut the door quietly. When she turned, Dakota was watching her. Eyes narrowed. As if he already knew. She tried to smile. "Nothing out there." But she said it too quickly. And the fire popped once, like a warning. The kettle whistled low and long, like a mourning dove waking up the cabin. Josie stood barefoot near the fire, sleeves rolled up, stirring cornmeal into a pot. The apron she wore had belonged to someone else once, frayed at the hem, stained with ash near the ties. She scrubbed it nightly, as if cleaning the fabric might erase whatever people whispered about her. Outside, Dakota chopped wood, rhythm steady, shirtless despite the frost that clung to the bark. His breath came in clouds, his arms moving with deliberate grace. Josie watched through the window, one hand resting on the sill. She'd never seen a man move that silently, like he wasn't just splitting logs, but making some kind of offering to the earth. She set the bowl down on the table when he entered, snow glittering on his shoulders. He nodded, eyes flicking to the food, then to her. "You always cook this early?" he asked, voice quiet as ever. "I couldn't sleep," she murmured. "Bad dream." He didn't ask more. Instead, he handed her a pouch of dried apples and added a handful to her pot. Josie stirred, slow and thoughtful. "Was it a wolf I saw yesterday?" "Maybe. Or someone worse." He met her eyes. "We'll be ready either way." A strange comfort in that. How simply he said we. She served him in silence, then herself. The warmth filled her belly, but still, she sat tense, knees tucked, eyes on her lap. I can find another place to stay, she said suddenly. I've brought attention you didn't ask for. Dakota didn't look up from his food. And where will you go? She opened her mouth, then shut it. He reached across the table, not to touch her but to offer a folded piece of hide. Inside were needles and scraps of cloth. If your hands must keep busy, stitch me gloves. She blinked. You trust me not to stab you with these? Not yet, he said, and a rare flicker of a smile crossed his lips. It faded quickly, but left something warm behind. So she stitched while he carved. Their tasks filled the space between them. Days passed like beads strung on a cord, quiet, close, unsaid. But nothing stayed hidden forever. By the fourth morning, Josie ventured into town to fetch sugar with the few coins Dakota had offered. He stayed behind, as he always did, invisible to the people who refused to see him. Snow had melted into slush along Main Street. Josie walked with her head down, shawl pulled tight, avoiding eyes. But they found her anyway. Mrs. Blevins stood on the porch of the general store, arms crossed, mouth twisted like a lemon rind. Well, if it isn't the girl who traded her virtue for stew. Josie paused. Inside the store, a few heads turned. The whisper ran through the shelves like wind through brittle wheat. I came for sugar, Josie said, trying to keep her voice steady. And I suppose you'll pay with a curtsy and a wink? I'll pay with coin, same as anyone. Mrs. Blevins sniffed. Your kind always costs more than you're worth. Josie handed the coins to the clerk, her fingers trembling. She kept her eyes low, but the heat in her cheeks burned hotter than the fire back home. Outside, as she stepped down the porch, a snowball struck her shoulder. She turned, just in time to see a group of boys duck around the alley. She didn't cry. Not there. But she walked the whole way back without looking up, the sugar clutched tight in her hands. At the cabin, she didn't speak. Just scrubbed the floor again, harder this time, until her fingers were raw. Dakota said nothing. Just watched. Later, he sat beside her near the fire, carved wood in his lap. Say it, she muttered. Say I'm foolish for going into town. He didn't. Instead, he reached for her hands. She resisted at first, but he was gentle, taking them into his, turning them palm up. Cuts. Redness. Shame she'd tried to scrub away. He dipped a cloth into warm water and cleaned her skin. Wordless. Careful. When he was done, he wrapped her fingers in linen. I don't want your pity, she whispered. Then take my respect. Her eyes welled. Why? Because you came back. That night, as snow began to fall again, Josie sang softly while stirring a pot. A lullaby her mother used to hum when the world still made sense. Dakota didn't interrupt. He just closed his eyes, as if remembering something too. By week's end, the first seeds of a rhythm had taken root. She swept at sunrise. He chopped at noon. They ate together, side by side, never facing one another fully but never looking away either. He began to build a second stool beside the fire. She stitched him gloves lined with rabbit fur. He gave her a flint knife. She made him tea from dried berries. A language of gestures began to grow where words had failed them both. One morning, she found a bundle of wildflowers, long dead, dried by frost, left on her side of the table. No note. But she knew. Later, when he caught her humming again, he said, My wife used to sing. Josie glanced at him, unsure if it was permission or pain. He clarified. She sang while making cornbread. Same tune. Josie offered a quiet smile. She had good taste. He nodded. So do you. That night, they sat together longer than usual. Firelight softened his face. She studied the lines around his eyes, the curve of his mouth. He didn't notice, or maybe he did, but let her look. Do you ever wish for before? She asked. He thought a long while. I wish for after. What do you mean? A day when I don't wake up with ghosts. She understood that too well. The next day, she set out early to fetch water from the stream, wanting to surprise him with a fresh pot. The air smelled like iron. Something in her stomach turned. By the time she reached the bank she knew. Tracks. Barefoot. Wide. Not animal. Circling the cabin again. Deeper this time. She filled the bucket quickly and returned. Her heart beat in her throat. When she entered, Dakota looked up at once. "Someone's been near again," she said. "I know. What do they want?" He didn't answer. Just stood and went to the door, securing the latch with an extra beam. He stoked the fire higher, checked the axes, then sat beside her again. "They'll test the door soon," he said, not frightened, just certain. Josie swallowed hard. "Will you let me help?" "You're already helping." "How?" "By staying." Her fingers brushed against his as she reached for a cup. For the first time, he didn't move away. And outside, the snow fell soft as ash. The sun cracked over the pines like a yolk on cold porcelain, pale light dripping through the frostbitten forest. Josie stood at the edge of the path with a basket in one hand, and her pride tucked somewhere deep beneath her ribs. The hem of her dress was frozen stiff, but her jaw held steady. She was going into town. Dakota, leaning against the porch post with his arms crossed, said nothing. He didn't stop her, but he didn't let her leave without meeting her eyes. "If you hear a shout," she told him with a small smile, "it means I've punched someone." He tilted his head. "Aim low. Easier to knock them off balance." Her smile deepened, then fell quiet. They stood like that for a breath longer than comfort should have allowed. Then she turned and walked down the trail. The road narrowed as the forest gave way to town. Snow clung to the rooftops like memory, and the clap of horses echoed through the streets. As she stepped onto the boardwalk outside the general store, conversation thinned. Boots stopped shuffling. Pipe smoke hung, unbothered by breath. Josie didn't meet anyone's gaze. Inside the store, she moved through the aisles with purpose. Flour. Salt. Oil, if she could afford it. She placed the items in her basket gently, like offerings to be judged. A thick voice cut the air. "Well, look what the snow dragged in." Mrs. Blevins stood by the counter, gray hair pinned back like iron nails, her lips pursed with satisfaction. "Didn't think you'd have the gall to show your face." Josie placed the tin of salt down with care. "It's a free country." "Is it now?" "Thought the red elk was keeping you chained up in the woods." Josie's hand twitched. She steadied it. "He's offered me shelter. That's more than the town ever did." "He's not a man. He's a savage. And you, well, you're the kind of girl who'd shame her father's grave for a warm meal." A silence thickened behind the barrels of flour and bolts of fabric. Josie's face burned, but she didn't look away. "He gave me back my dignity," she said, voice low. "What have you given anyone?" The room held its breath. Mrs. Blevins sneered. "Don't think kindness makes you clean." A man cleared his throat at the back of the store. "Reverend Tilson." He stepped forward, hat in hand, eyes steady on Josie. "Miss Walker," he said gently, "would you allow me to carry your things?" Josie blinked. She hadn't expected mercy from him. Not after the way the church doors had shut on her last fall. Still, she nodded. They walked in silence down the steps. He helped her into his cart, loading her supplies beside her. As he climbed up, he spoke without turning. "People talk too loud when they fear they've been wrong." "I didn't come here to argue," she said. "No, you came because you had the courage to. That's enough." The snow had started again, falling in lazy spirals. By the time they reached the edge of town, Josie could see the trail back home winding through the trees. Tilson stopped the cart. "Don't let their shame become yours," he said. "Sometimes it's the outcasts who know heaven best." She stepped down. "Thank you, Reverend." "Thank him," he said, nodding toward the woods. "That man's endured more fire than they'll ever face. And still he shelters you." The ride home was slower. Josie carried her basket tighter, but her steps felt steadier somehow. The ache of town still clung to her, but it didn't dig quite so deep. When she reached the cabin, Dakota was splitting wood again. Shirtless, as always, snow melting on his shoulders. "Town was lovely," she said, setting the basket down. "Mrs. Blevins invited me to tea and embroidery." His mouth twitched. That so? I declined. I was too busy being a heathen's concubine. That drew a low grunt from his chest, something almost like a laugh. Later, they sat at the fire. She stitched by lamplight. He whittled a curve into a length of birch. Between them, the heat held steady. She said you weren't a man, Josie said softly. He didn't look up. She's wrong. His hands paused. Then resumed. I don't need her to know what I am. But I do, she said. Now he looked at her. Why? Because I'm tired of shrinking. He set the wood aside. You don't shrink. You compress. Like coals. She bit her lip. You ever wish things had been different? He leaned back, eyes distant. I used to. And now? I wish I'd loved harder while I had time. Josie set her sewing down. Her voice broke the quiet like a dropped plate. She died, didn't she? Your wife. He nodded once. Was it your fault? His jaw tensed. They said so. Said I brought the curse. That her pain in birth meant the spirits were angry. That's foolish. Doesn't change what they believe. She reached out, fingertips grazing his wrist. But what do you believe? He looked at her, really looked. That I wasn't enough to save her. Josie let her hand fall. That's not shame. That's grief pretending to be guilt. Outside, the wind shifted. The logs popped. Snow whispered against the windows like fingertips brushing glass. He stood, walked to the shelf, and returned with something wrapped in cloth. He placed it in her lap. Inside was a small pouch, stitched in blue thread, marked with a symbol that looked like a river winding through a mountain. My wife's, he said. She stitched it the day before Wakasa was born. Josie's fingers shook. It's beautiful. He nodded. You remade the same pattern. Without knowing. She stared at him. That means something, he said. To me. The moment stretched between them, fragile and full. Then the cabin window shattered. Glass burst inward with a hiss of wind. Josie screamed, covering her head. Dakota moved before the echo had died, pulling her behind him. An object clattered to the floor. A brand burned into a block of wood. It was scorched with a crude X. A warning. Josie knelt, staring at it. What does it mean? They're coming, Dakota said, eyes sharp, voice steady. Soon. Her breath caught. For me. For both of us. She rose slowly, met his gaze. Then let them. I won't run again. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. And in that quiet pact, something shifted, deeper than words, louder than glass breaking. Outside, the snow thickened. The world, once cold and cruel, now held fire at its center. The cold came sharp that morning, not in temperature, but in spirit. The broken window had been boarded, the fire stoked high, but something unseen now moved inside the cabin. Unease, like a draft curling beneath the soul. Josie swept the floor in tight strokes, her back tense, gaze flicking toward the door more often than the hearth. Every sound outside, a shifting branch, the cry of a distant bird, tightened her shoulders. Dakota hadn't spoken much since the window shattered. He moved like a man preparing for winter inside himself. He'd oiled the blades, checked the locks twice, refitted the hinges with iron pins. She watched him sometimes, wondering what he saw in his mind. What ghost stood over his shoulder? They won't stop, she said softly, binding her own fingers in cloth where the broom had rubbed them raw. Not until they've made sure we're ruined. He paused by the wall, holding a hatchet in one hand. Then let them try. She let out a breath. You talk like they're wolves. But people, they use words like claws. Wolves bite, he replied. But they don't lie. She smiled faintly, then looked down. I should go. He turned. No. If I leave, maybe they'll leave you be. He stepped closer. You are not the cause of their hate. No, just their excuse. Dakota's voice deepened, gentled. I've lived on the edge of hate since I was a boy. You bring something different. You make the cabin warmer. You hum. She blinked, surprised.
You noticed?
He nodded once. When you cook. When you sew. I forgot sound could carry light. Josie looked away, suddenly shy. Her fingers twisted the apron at her waist. I used to sing all the time. Before Mama died. Before shame found me. He said nothing for a long while. Then, softly. Your voice stays in the wood after you stop. She turned at the sound of hooves. A shadow moved past the trees, slow, uncertain. She stepped closer to the window. It's Elsie Carter, she whispered. He's drunk. Dakota's jaw set. Stay inside. Josie touched his arm. Don't hurt him. I won't, he said. Unless he gives me reason. Elsie's voice cracked across the snow like a whip. Hey! You in there, Red Elk. You hiding my girl. Dakota opened the door slowly. No coat. No weapons. Just the cold and his height. Elsie was on horseback, bottle in hand, weaving in his saddle. Heard you were playing house, you overgrown savage.
Is she yours now?
Or is she just rent for the week? Josie stepped forward, face pale with fury. But Dakota raised one hand to stop her. She came to my door starving, he said calmly. You all turned her away. That's your shame, not mine. Elsie sneered. She's trash. Always was. Good at looking soft till you learn she's hollow. Dakota stepped off the porch. Elsie laughed. Gonna fight me, Red Elk? Gonna bleed for her? Dakota didn't answer. Elsie lunged forward with the bottle raised. It never touched him. Dakota caught the man mid-swing, yanked him from the saddle like a doll, and threw him into the snow. Not hard. Just enough to knock the wind out. Elsie wheezed. You think you're better than us? No, Dakota said. But I'm better than you. He turned and walked away. Didn't gloat. Didn't kick him. Just left him shivering in the snow. Josie stood in the doorway, breath caught in her chest. When he stepped inside, she met him with a look that trembled. You didn't have to protect me. Yes, he said simply. I did. She moved toward him. Not fast, not with any plan. Just drawn by something she couldn't name. Her hand found his forearm. I'm not used to kindness that doesn't cost something. He didn't move. Then let this be the start. Later, when the sky darkened, they sat near the fire. She handed him the gloves she'd finished. The stitches weren't perfect, but the lining was warm, the color a soft russet that matched the fire's glow. He tried them on without a word. They're not much, she said. They're more than I deserve. Her brow furrowed. Don't say that. It's true. She shifted on the stool, looking at him carefully. Why do you believe your pain is something earned? He didn't answer. She leaned in. You lost a wife. A child. Then your people cast you out for surviving. But you still chop wood for strangers. Still share food with a girl who brought nothing but trouble to your door. That doesn't sound like a man with shame. He turned toward her. It sounds like a man who has nothing left. She reached out, brushing his hand. You have this cabin. And me, if you want. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was reverent. He closed his hand over hers. Rough palms, steady fingers. You're the first thing I haven't buried, he said. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. She wiped them quickly. Then let's live like we mean it. Outside, snow began again, softer this time. She helped him hang herbs above the fire that night. Made stew with the last of the potatoes. He lit 2 candles instead of 1. And when they sat together, knees brushing, she hummed without shame. That night, she dreamed not of fleeing, but of planting. But morning came with more than snow. Tracks. Boot prints. Fresh. Dakota found them before she did. A dozen men, maybe more, circling the perimeter. They'll return tonight, he said. Josie stood still, eyes wide. He looked at her. You're not leaving. She didn't flinch. I know. He gathered the axes. The flint rifle. Moved with precision. She lit every lantern they had. They worked together in silence, building not a defense, but a stand. He gave her a flint knife. She kissed his cheek. Just once. Not for romance. But for rightness. Outside, the cold deepened. But inside, there was fire. The storm came before the men did. Wind howled like wolves through the pines, and snow fell in thick curtains, erasing the world one branch at a time. Inside the cabin, the fire roared, casting long shadows across the floor. Josie wrapped furs around her shoulders and tied her hair back, not for beauty but clarity. Her hands didn't shake, though the air around them trembled. Dakota stood by the window, watching. He hadn't spoken in some time. He was still, too still. Not afraid. Just listening. "They'll wait for dark," he said. She nodded. "I'm ready." He turned then, his gaze falling soft on her. "No. You're brave." She didn't correct him. Didn't say brave and terrified often wore the same face. By twilight, the snow had buried the steps halfway to the knees. The tracks from earlier were long covered, but the sense of danger hadn't drifted with the snow. It thickened. Closer. Waited. Then, the first sound, a crunch. Boot on ice. Then another. Josie stepped to the hearth and lifted the flint knife Dakota had sharpened only hours earlier. She held it in both hands. Dakota met her eyes. "Stay by the fire." "No," she said. He didn't argue. Just handed her a lantern. They waited. The knock didn't come. Instead, something struck the side of the cabin, hard. Then again. A man's voice rang out. "Send the girl out, Red Elk, and this ends clean." Dakota opened the door himself. The wind rushed in, wild with snow and fury. 10 men stood outside. Elsie among them. And others with torches, farmers, ranch hands, faces Josie recognized, twisted now into something small and mean. "She's done nothing," Dakota called over the wind. "She's done plenty," Elsie barked. "Brought shame. Took up with a savage. And now she'll bring God's wrath on us all." Dakota stepped out, bare-chested in the cold. His breath came in steam, but his eyes were fire. "Then take me. Leave her." One man stepped forward with a rope. Josie's scream split the dark. She pushed past the door, hair whipping in the wind, knife raised. "Don't you dare!" She shouted. "He saved me. You left me to starve, and he gave me bread. You mocked me, and he gave me a name again." The men flinched. "You call yourselves righteous?" She continued, voice fierce. "You shun the wounded, break the hungry, and cower behind torches like cowards in the dark." Elsie laughed, stepping closer. "You've always been loud, Josie. That mouth never earned you love." She didn't step back. "No. But it'll earn me justice." Elsie raised his hand. Dakota moved faster than breath. He slammed into Elsie, knocking him to the ground. The snow drank the scuffle. A second man lunged forward, swinging a club. Josie threw her lantern. Glass shattered, flame catching in the snow, just enough to blind him. Dakota swept the man's legs from under him, pinning him with a knee. The others hesitated. Uncertain now, not trained, just angry and cold and unsure. Then a voice rang out. "Enough!" Reverend Tilson stood at the trail's end, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. Behind him, 2 more figures, Mrs. Blevins' own son among them. "You shame the Lord with this," Tilson said. "You want to stone a woman for surviving? You want to hang a man who's shown more grace than any of you." Elsie groaned in the snow. "She's filth." "She's a daughter of God," Tilson cut in, stepping closer. "And he's a better man than you'll ever be." No one moved. Josie stood panting, fists clenched, blade shaking in her palm. Dakota exhaled once. Long. Controlled. The men dispersed. Not all at once, but like frost melting from stone. One by one. Eyes low. Hearts shaken. Only Elsie remained, coughing into the snow. Josie walked over and dropped the knife beside him. "Next time you threaten a woman," she whispered, "bring something sharper than a lie." She turned and walked back to the cabin. Dakota followed, quiet as the flakes drifting around them. Inside, they said nothing at first. The fire had burned low, but it hadn't gone out. Josie knelt and fed it more wood, coaxing the flame back to life. Dakota stood behind her, the heat on his chest, the trembling still in his limbs. She looked up. "Would you have died for me?" she asked. "I've already lived for you," he said. She stood, slowly, and stepped close. Her hand rested against his chest, over the steady thrum of a heart too long kept in silence. "I don't want to be your debt," she whispered. "You're not. I want to be your home." The words fell quiet between them. But they didn't break. He rested his forehead to hers, breath mingling with hers in the space firelight had softened. "You already are." The next morning, the sky cracked wide with gold. Josie rose before the embers dimmed, wrapped in Dakota's coat, bare feet on warm floorboards. She opened the door to find the world hushed under new snow. A single pine cone sat on the step, carved into the bark, her name. Behind her, Dakota stirred. The sound of him moving was no longer unfamiliar. It was comfort, rhythm, belonging. She turned back inside and smiled. And in that quiet warmth, she knew, winter would pass. Not because the season would end, but because she was no longer alone. Not a ghost. Not a disgrace. Just a woman who had found her fire again. Some folks say love comes like thunder. Fast. Loud. Wild. But sometimes, it comes in the hush between snowfalls. In a cabin where judgment burned outside, but inside, there was only warmth. And if you've ever felt too shamed to knock on someone's door, remember this. Kindness is louder than gossip. And sometimes, love begins with a plate of food, a clean floor, and a man who knows how to listen.